Hey guys, welcome back to the Woven Energy Podcast with me, Joseph Sikora, and Damon Smith, where we talk about shamanism from the ground up. And this is episode 35. So, first of all, in the last episode, we talked about the spirit dance. So we're going to talk about the spirit dance part 2 in this episode. But before we do, you might have noticed that we haven't really been releasing many episodes lately. That is going to change because my circumstances have definitely eased up a little bit. So I'm going to be able to have a bit more time to put into these episodes. So we're going to start knocking some more episodes out. Damon, I hope that's the same for you.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, the Heretics episodes are becoming out thick and fast. So
thick and fast, yeah. So, we're getting a bit edgy over here at the Woven Energy, but we can't have you overtaking us. They're all going to start flowing out again. We do have some Patreons to thank, or patrons to thank. What do we call them, Damon? Are they Patreons or are they patrons?
I call them patrons, but sometimes I slip up and say Patreons. Patreon is the mechanism. So yeah, we do. So we got, since the last one, we've had Courtney Schaff, Ben Muck, and Sane Cat Lawn, which I presume is not a real name, a kind of made up name. So thank you guys. That's awesome. Also, one of our old patrons, Tamo, has upped their support level. I don't know if we mentioned that on the Woven Energy podcast, which is greatly appreciated. Thanks, Tamo. And also, he's been doing a bunch of design work for the new forthcoming Woven Energy website, which does look awesome. So,
great.
That is a forthcoming website designed by Tamo. That will be available to view shortly.
That's fantastic because the website we've got right now definitely needs a bit of an overhaul.
It's garbage, isn't it?
Yeah, it just doesn't work, does it? I mean, there's you can basically go to the homepage and view the episodes, but the blog's just so slow.
So the idea of that site also is to try and make it a bit cleaner. It's to make an interface into the Grove, and to also put some stuff about the other things that we're involved in particular the internal arts. It's to try and make a sort of yin and yang. We're trying to figure out which one was yin and which one was yang. I guess the Grove would be yin and the internal arts would be yang, which is kind of strange from an internal arts point of view, So it will be ultimately be an interface into the online learning environment that we've been developing. And it's just the start of a look and feel design for that. And like I say, that will be available soon. We're going to show it around the patrons first, see what they think of it. And then we'll release it to the world. While trying to maintain all the abilities that the old one had, play the podcast online, through the website, and also, to allow people to sign up for that the unreleased episode that Joe keeps talking about. All that stuff, all that functionality will remain, and it will look a lot cleaner, and it will certainly perform a lot better in terms of responsiveness.
You mentioned that episode. You can get hold of that if you go to wovenenergy.com and somehow navigate around the site and pop your email address in, and the first email back to you will contain that episode. It's quite a fun little episode. We recorded it quite a while ago now, but I did try to push Damon a bit. We are.
Well, there's also the hereticspodcast.com, which is maintained by Graham, which has. Oh, it's got a lot of stuff on it. I've just logged onto it. I should have looked at it more carefully. Yeah. So that's hereticspodcast.com. That's a website run by Graham dedicated to the Heretics podcast. And it's quite cool, actually. There's some cool artwork, and I've only just looked at it this second. And there's an episode. It's got a thing on the feature on an episode we did recently, which is our first ever film review. We did a review on the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, just for the patrons. And that's a film that Graham likes and I dislike. And so we go into a bit of detail as to why each of us likes and dislikes that film. And so lots of stuff happening with Heretics as well. So if you haven't seen that and you're interested in the Heretics podcast, then head over to hereticspodcast.com.
Heretics is like well, the Woven Energy, we like to see them as quote unquote the same podcast in a way, don't we? I think the Woven Energy podcast is very much based on shamanism, and we try and talk around topics that very much relate to shamanism, to loosely related to shamanism.
Yeah.
But on the Heretics podcast, it's very much like it's Damon being able to just fart out all your knowledge in as many different areas as you want, really.
It's stuff that we could have talked about, isn't it? If time permitting, but we'd never got anywhere if we'd started going in. I mean, like you say, it's like we've actually done 26 episodes of Heretics. Now, you imagine if me and you were trying to crunch through all those episodes in addition to trying to do Woven Energy, it would have taken a very long time, that's for sure, you know?
Yeah. So while the Woven Energy podcast is focused on shamanism, Woven Energy, Heretics is more broad.
Yeah,
but it's loosely based on what we call the miasma, isn't it? So its right. Underlying focus is to try and give a bit more background to what we call the miasma on this podcast, which is one of the main pitfalls of learning shamanism, really, or what stands in our way.
Yeah, absolutely.
The veil.
And I think that there's another big difference between the two, which is the call to action thing. On this podcast, we're always trying to persuade people to go and do things, aren't we? Go out and practice a whole bunch of techniques. Get out and practice. There's nothing like that on Heretics. It's just come and listen if you're interested. It's just a general interest kind of podcast.
Yeah, and you can dip in and out, can't you? So you can look at the title, see what you might
you don't have
find
to listen to
interesting.
Them all.
Like with the Woven Energy podcast. This is one of the reasons I've been thinking about the Woven Energy podcast. Is it's fantastic, but it is one of the podcasts where you kind of have to listen from the beginning, which has its upsides and its downsides. I mean, the upsides is it becomes more rich as time goes on, but one of the downsides is that you can't just dip in and out, so you end up leaving people behind, because we do. I try and cover the terms as much as I can when we bring them up in future episodes, but you know, to get the most out of Woven Energy, you have to go from the beginning, really. And in the Heretics, you can just dip in and out.
It's a training course, isn't it? Really, it's a sort of audio training course, yeah. And it is very linear. It does proceed through in a fairly sensible fashion. So anyway, yeah, I think I missed off thanking our patrons there. So we were reading out the list of patrons. I actually missed one off. So anyway, thanks to all our patrons. You know how appreciated you are. You're making all this kind of stuff happen, like the new Heretics podcast website and the forthcoming new Woven Energy. All that stuff's happening because we've got patrons now. The design work on the new website, like I said, is being done by one of our patrons. Which is fantastic. And so, you know, you guys are making stuff happen here. It's greatly appreciated. The patron who I've missed off is Joe is actually a member of. This is, we have a new founder patron. We have one other founder patron, which is Shingi Academy. And there is nobody better, presumably nobody better, to tell you a bit about Shingi Academy than one of the co-founders of the Shingi Academy, which is Joe.
Shingi Academy it was an idea that we had, me and my friend Paul Andrews, who are both your students, and it was somehow because Shingi is such a little known art, and you've mentioned it a few times on the podcast as being quite relevant to shamanism in a way. That's one of the statements, you know, Shingi is related.
I think I said shamanism. It was the most shamanic martial art that I've come across. Yeah.
Yeah, and that does require some knowledge to understand what that truly means. But yeah, it was our idea to try and get that knowledge out somehow to a wide audience. So it's an academy where we've laid down pretty much everything we can to do with the foundations so far of Xingyi, and we are expanding out into multiple different courses. And watch this space, because that is going to change as well. We've got lots of plans for the future with regards to other arts and other courses, and it's going to be a really good little learning hub. But yeah, we are proud.
And you've been going a while now, haven't you?
Yeah, it's going good. We've got a good handful of really dedicated students who are awesome. Got a little private community, and we just try and learn the art together but as you know, it's a martial art, so learning online has its ups and downs. Its downs is it's a physical art, so it makes it more difficult to learn online, but its positives are that finally we are able to provide a framework for people to be able to access that art. So
yeah, cool.
It's going good. It's going really good. And there are lots of plans for the future. So if you're interested in Xingyi, check it out, xingyiacademy.com.
So, yeah.
No, it sounds like a sponsorship now, doesn't it?
Well, that's what I said.
It's not a sponsorship.
That's what I said on Heretics. I said, because it's an academy, is it really a patron, or is it like a corporate sponsor or something,
Yeah, it's not a corporate sponsor. It's all connected. But this is the thing, right, Damon? Because you sit at the sort of top of the tree, so to speak, and down from the tree, all the little branches, we've been beginning to create this really good framework, aren't we, of various different avenues. There's the Heretics, there's your various martial arts, the Xingyi Academy, there's the Woven Energy podcast, and it all leads to the same point.
Yeah.
They're just different aspects of it.
Yeah. That's always been a tough thing for me, is because I've, as you know, I've always seen these things as the same thing for many decades anyway. That they don't appear different to me. But as you know, with my student group over the years, I've certainly had people in my student group who are, or the people I'm guiding, if you like, in shamanic terms, who are interested in one thing and not interested in another thing, whereas I have a sort of voracious appetite for all of the above,
Well, I think that's partly down to the fact that you've trained so much chillicity that the barriers have almost disintegrated, and things are, I guess I've experienced it a little bit, but things are much more spectrum-like than they are category-like in this world, and the more you can think in terms of spectrums rather than binary category thinking, the more quote unquote enlightened you'll be.
That's been an issue, hasn't it, in terms of getting our message out with Woven Energy. I mean, it's in a way, the internet and the internet age, they sort of force categorization, don't they? It's just like search engine optimization. How do what are people typing into their web browser in order to find you? And that in itself, in order to find you, they're putting you into a category and then searching for it, and it's, that's a toughie,
Yeah, and our category is shamanism, but what does shamanism even mean? It's difficult. It's very difficult.
Yeah, indeed. Anyway.
So, the spirit dance. So last episode we were talking about various ways we can find examples of spirit dance. It's a while ago now, so we'll have to refresh my memory. But we were looking at Sufism, a little bit of Sufis. We were talking, was it stuff, you were talking about a few Japanese things as well.
Yeah.
So if you want to take us away.
We also looked at the Dance of the Devil from Colombia. And we looked at, just looking down the list of the ones we'd covered, Bobichig, I think we mentioned that. That's basically the subject of the Grove, so there's not much point in going into a lot of detail on it on here. There's the Haka, that's what we started off with, wasn't it, from rugby?
Oh, yeah, the Haka. So just to put people in perspective a little bit, let's just remind ourselves what the spirit dance is, because what we're looking at here are examples of what might have once been a deeply shamanic practice, which we know as stage 3 of shamanism, the spirit dance. But they're examples of almost fragments and what it's turned into, because the danger with these things is when you learn shamanism, it's very much an experientially based practice, but the more that you try to teach it, the more you have to lay it down in a step-by-step manner, and then the more ritualized things become, and that results in a lot of the examples that we're exploring in these episodes.
It's very, very difficult in the modern world to get away from the miasma. I mean, we used examples that are sort of very degenerate, you would think of it like that, but we also give some examples that are not that, like the Anu crane dance that we mentioned. You can still see that that's cranes, you can still see that that's the spirit of cranes being expressed through human dancers. You can still see that even after all the nightmarish suppression that's been placed on Ainu culture, even despite all of that, it still comes through. It's still real spirit dance, which is fantastic, really,
What's the difference between real spirit dance and ritualized spirit dance?
So, ritualized spirit dance is let's answer that question through giving another example of spirit dance and doing a bit of detail on it. And this is the reason I thought of this one is I believe Shingi Academy have been doing a course on it. It's a thing called Yan Yi, which is a little known practice, a little known form of spirit dance that is sometimes taught alongside internal arts. Now, I only know it from one location, that's from Malaysia, and I haven't come across it. It was fairly tightly integrated with martial arts tradition that I learned from a gentleman from Malaysia, but he insisted that it was a separate thing, and it's called Yan Yi. And it comes from an ethnic Chinese population. People are probably aware, in Malaysia as a country is a real kind of melting pot of different cultures and people of different origins, and it's a great trading area. It's been a great trading area for centuries, and so you have people who've come into there and moved through that area for all sorts of different reasons, bringing their own cultures with them. These days it's a Muslim majority country, but it still has a lot of minority religions and ideas, and they have people like the Orang Asli tribes, who are effectively the original inhabitants of Malaysia, who are actually a tiny minority of the Malay population, but they still preserve a lot of shamanistic stuff among themselves. And my suspicion is, I have no way of knowing, but my suspicion is that the Chinese, if you like, Taoist style arts got mixed by somebody at some relatively recent generation with the traditional culture of what's known as dukuns in Malaysia. And our dukuns are effectively the shamans of Malaysia. They are still there. They're still there. You can go and find them today. And they are somewhat frowned upon, I guess, because, Islam is the major religion of the country. But they have a long history. But again, it's still in line with that sort of trade-oriented nature of Malaysia as a country. Historically, the Orang Asli, the majority of the dukuns come from their population historically, they used to trade. They used to trade with these other people who were coming through that area. And they traded basically jungle produce, stuff that they grew in the jungle, and they would swap that for salt. Salt was a big trading commodity, probably about 100 years ago in Malaysia, and also metal products, which they didn't really produce themselves. They also quite famous for the use of their blowpipes. These guys look super shamanistic, going around the jungle with their blowpipes. If anyone says there's any shamans around here, that they're likely to be a prime candidate for, if you saw them from a distance, thinking there's a shamanic society. And they played a long time, an economic role in the Malay Peninsula's history. As traders, since, as early as the 5th century AD. So although they're jungle people, they've been traders for a very, very long time. They used to pay tribute to the Malay chiefs. Of course, they weren't running Malaysia. Malaysia's had a series of rulers from different backgrounds, ultimately ending up with Islamic rulers. And they have their spirit dance, which is called the Sewang dance. And this is why I suspect... How do you spell that? Sewang. And when I see this dance, when I've seen it on YouTube and stuff like that, I've never learned the dance itself, but I have learned Yan Yi. there's an awful lot of stuff in there that's also in Yan Yi. So this is why I have no knowledge of the historical link between the two things, but I have a heavy suspicion that there's a kind of mixture of Chinese and Malay culture, native Malay culture, in this art of Yan Yi. Now, the way I'm going to answer your question is just to talk about how this type of spirit dance works. It works off energy, as you might expect. And in Chinese, energy is called qi. And I think previously we did quite an extensive podcast episode, didn't we, talking about energy, in terms of, in the West, we've tried to turn this, and in the Far East, for purposes of tourism, we've tried to turn this ordinary energy into some sort of mystical kind of magical kind of energy that seemed to happen as a result of the sort of the flower power generation, and the sort of hippie movement. But originally it's just energy. And so it's an energy dance. Like all spirit dancers are energy dancers. And what's the difference between a normal dance or a degenerate ritualized form of spirit dance and what I would call a real spirit dance? What is leading the energy in the dance? That's a very, very simple, it's a complex question, but if you want a really, really simple answer, that question is the nature of the thing that's leading the energy in the dance tells you whether it's the genuine article or whether it's, something degenerate or a cultural art form, if you like. Now, if that thing is largely culture, then it's ordinary dancing. Yeah. So if you do this step and that step, or if this person does this and then you do that, and it's kind of scripted. It can still be freeform, but it's kind of scripted. I've done quite a bit of Latin type of dance in my life with salsa and stuff like that. Those things they can be done freeform. You can dance it free, but it's scripted. Each of the dancers knows a particularized sets of movements that if one person does something, then the other person does something.
You're speaking the same language.
Yeah, and also
you're both speaking the same language.
You have a concept of somebody leading and somebody following, yeah? Because if they're both leading, it doesn't really work very well in that kind of scripted environment, yeah?
Ends up in a fight, doesn't it?
And ultimately, I know you've done a bit yourself, mate. Wasn't that how you got your wife, actually?
Yes, it was, yeah.
You're not the Joe I met, are you? So in spirit dance, that's not true. Yeah, in spirit dance done well, the underlying principle, that part of the underlying principle of nature that we can come close to is known as Xin. That's Xin in pinyin. And sometimes it gets translated as heart, which is, in some senses, it's a bad translation, and some senses it's a good translation. If you think of Shin in terms of the heart as in a poetic sense, not the physical organ inside your body, but the heart of something, getting to the heart of something. The heart of nature is the Shin, or at least that part of the heart of nature which we can come close to. You would say that Shin is a portion of Shen, which is the underlying spirit of nature, that human beings can approach in our kind of finiteness, if you like, our finite worldview, our finite lives, our finite, And there are two ways that our intent as human beings, our will, our intention, that thing that drives us, our thoughts, if you like, there are two ways they can arise. One is they can arise from our culture and from our miasma and from our conditioning, yeah? One of the reasons, for instance, to give a very simple example of that is times tables that you memorize in school, right? When you're memorizing your times tables, you're not really understanding the heart and core of mathematics in the way that some advanced
It's kind of the
mathematician...
issue with the whole of education.
Yes, you're just learning them by rote. And when somebody says, what's 2 times 2, you just know. You don't know why, but you know. Yeah. And so, you don't know why in a a very fundamental sense. You just learned the answer to that. And that's one type of yi. Yi being your intent, your thoughts, what drives you, what causes you to take action. There's another way, which is to allow, through the application of rituality, is to allow that underlying spirit of nature, that Shin, to, incidentally, I'm using Yan Yi terminology here. You allow that underlying spirit of nature, that Shin, to give that rise directly to your intention. So in a way, it's no longer your intention, is it? It kind of becomes the intent of the temporal moment, the environment, the things, all the complexities of the weave, of the interaction of underlying principles that are going on in that environment, and effectively to give rise to spontaneous intent that isn't premeditated, intent that is as continually being generated out of the core of you. Now, both of those yis, the one that's generated by the miasma, stroke social conditioning, stroke your culture, all that kind of stuff, and the other yi, the one that's generated by the underlying spirit of nature, to the extent that the shaman has absorbed it or has allowed themselves to come under its influence, both of those can lead the energy to change within the human body, give changes to the qi, is the Chinese term, within the human body. Both of those things can. But when it is the miasma stroke, social conditioning stroke, rote learning stroke, scripted stuff stroke, habituated responses to problems, all that kind of stuff is giving rise to the yi and leading the energy. That is ritualized dance. That is ordinary dance, if you like. But when it's that truly spontaneous underlying spirit of nature, that Shin that is giving rise to the yi spontaneously, of course, these are a matter of degrees, right? It's never 100% of one and 100% of the other. It's a matter of proportion. That's giving rise to the energy changes within the body, then that's proper spirit dance. And that's the difference between the two of them.
Cool. So let's take Yan Yi for it a little bit further then, because I've done a bit of Yan Yi with Paul.
Yeah.
And with Xingyi Academy. So what we do is we learn set movements to start with, because like all forms of dance, it's almost like you need to learn the language of the dance first. You need to kind of understand the framework and the fabric under which you are operating in. So
you have to internalize it.
But, yeah, so
well, you are to a certain extent. You are slightly wrong. Not that you're ever completely wrong, Joe, but slightly wrong. In that, if you learn Yan Yi the way I learned it, it wasn't really set movements. It was set patterns of momentum.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's not in the same way as dance steps.
That's a much better way of explaining it. So, for instance, in the way we did it, we would learn the 5 elements of the art of Xingyi in the form of Yan Yi.
Yeah.
As almost like a flow, and it becomes a rhythm and a flow. But it's not yet what you might call a spirit dance, or is it?
Well, first of all, the 5 elements of Xingyi are incorporated into Yan Yi, I suspect only for historical reasons. It's certainly not when I learned Yan Yi, it's certainly not the first thing that I did. The first thing that I did was what I would call patterns of momentum. It's combining large and small circles. So it tends to be that you would stand and start turning from side to side. And that sort of makes a large circle of movement, a large circle of energy or momentum. And then the next step was to turn from side to side and take a large circle, turn it into a small circle, and to preserve the momentum, and then turn it into a large circle again as you're moving from side to side. This all needs a video. We can put this in the Grove. Or if you guys are doing a training course on it, then you can get it from that as well. But the point is that there's no fixed position.
Yeah.
There's nothing telling you that your left hand has to be up and your right hand has to be down, or your left foot has to be forwards, or anything like that. It's more like the changes of the trigrams. So if you think of in terms of Gaia, Gaia, turning from side to side, you can make quite a large momentum circle. But then you start incorporating squall. That's a broken baseline, solid midline, solid top line. Yin, yang, yang is rated up from the base. Then you start to generate spontaneously that small circle, and it almost becomes like the small circle is incorporated within the large circle, and so on. And so that's and then you start working on, you've learned these facts, and then naturally that will make you want to step. Yeah. Step to where? Well, step to where would be predicated, wouldn't it, in something like salsa or shingy or something like that, how you step. There's nothing, it's just wherever it takes you. To me, this is kind of the difference between spirit dance, and there's no right and wrong in terms of where you take, but I guess there is wrong because you step somewhere awkward that doesn't fit with the energy changes that are going on within the body.
One story which Paul always says, which is really interesting, I think, is he was I hope he's all right with me telling this, but he was doing Yan Yi in his front room. The TV was off, but the old-fashioned TVs had a bit of a reflection in there, and he was just playing around with one simple movement, which was the compress and expand. As the arms come in, the arms come out, the arms come in, and natural over time you begin to step. And he says that it's only happened once, but this experience he had was like he started, and he looked at the clock, and it was like 9 o'clock at night, something like that. And literally the next time he looked at the clock was 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah,
and he seriously couldn't. It was as if only about 20 minutes to half an hour had passed.
Yes, I know exactly what he means.
Yeah, only playing with that one movement, but because
it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah. And I've experienced this as well. It's, if you keep things simple to start with, I guess there are levels and stages you go through, but you keep things simple. You play around with just one movement, in, out, and then the stepping follows. And it's almost like the stepping just is. It's not
Exactly. And there's the difference between spirit dance and normal dance. In a normal dance, for instance, if I was teaching Xingyi and somebody wants to turn, right, then I'll show them how to do it. We've got a couple of ways of doing it. We've got the Hebei turn, Shaanxi turn, different ways of doing footwork for getting around the turn. If somebody asks in Yan Yi, how should I turn? So you're not ready to turn yet. Because if you need to ask the question, you're not there yet. Because like you said, it happens, right? The stepping happens quite naturally. It's not anything that you need to be taught. That's probably the best way to put it. And that's why I love spirit dance as a thing, because in a way, it's the naturalness of the movement. It's the spontaneousness and naturalness and congruity of the movement that tells you whether it's quote unquote right or wrong. It's not a teacher. I mean, the teacher is there for the same reason that a teacher's there for in any other form of shamanism. The teacher's there to stop you becoming delusional. That's their job. That's their primary job, right? Give you a few ideas that give you the benefit of them having done it before you and having gone through that before you, but they're not there to teach you how to dance. In terms of spirit dance, only nature can do that. And this is what we're trying to do with arts like Yan Yi. We're trying to get people into a position where nature is teaching them. And what I mean by nature in that terms is, if there is momentum, if there is energy change within your body, if there is a natural movement within your body, that predicates the unimportant matters of where you're stepping, where you're putting your hands, Where's your head? How's your head positioned? Those are completely unimportant things in spirit dance. Whereas if you compare them to, say, ballroom dancing, those are the things you're being judged on, right? You know, if there's a ballroom dancing competition, you see them in these horrendous postures with this. so this, I'm not slagging it down. I mean, it's very skillful, you know, but you see this horrible smile that's been plastered on their face because they're getting points for it and this sort of thing, you know. And it's just like, oh my goodness, you know. So that's, if you want to see the opposite, the exact far polar opposite of spirit dance, watch a ballroom dancing competition.
Yeah.
Especially if there's judges sat there checking their positions and, you know, everything elegant, straight back and all that kind of stuff, you know.
So in essence, then, in terms of stages, we have very much to start with, a rhythmic, almost like a rhythmic repetitive momentum. And then we've got free flow momentum. And then we've got free flow momentum that is coloured by animals, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's obviously extremely simplistic, but would that be?
So it is, but what you find is that those 8 changes, they're so prevalent within nature that taking on the spirit of an animal, this is more advanced stuff. This isn't really what I was talking about, but basically it is, yeah. At a more advanced level, having got yourself in a state of chillicity where all this wonderful variety of energy changes going on, effectively you don't set out to embody the trigrams, but you don't have a choice. Because in terms of Yanyi, you don't have a choice because it's kind of hard not to. How would you execute Yanyi not doing so? It's kind of impossible, you know what I mean? Because those, you know, energy cycles, compression, expansion, you know, mutual
they're
support,
the fundamental
joining.
energy changes, aren't they?
Yeah,
That's why they exist.
You can't not do them. But my point with the animals is when you are forming a shape, as call it Xing in Xingyi and in Yanyi, a shape with your life, a shape within the environment, a shape with your movement. When you're forming that, it can be flavored. And what that means is just slightly different choices in terms of the propensity. And, you know, the 8 trigrams then mutually support each other in various different ways. And that's how we end up with the 64 hexagrams in the Book of Changes, which we said we'd do a 64 episode series on at some point in time. Yeah. So the point is that when you are embodying those changes, you can make slightly different flavors. I view it like a glass of water, and the water's moving. It's not constant. It's not stable. It's moving. Maybe it's like a water running down a wiggly pipe or something like that. There's a lot of change going on anyway. And then you can put little flavors in, you know, like Robinson's barley water or something, you know, I don't know, or orange flavor or something, or what's that one called that I had some this week? Grenadine, yeah, that type of stuff.
Grenadine.
You can put little flavors in, and it's still the same water, it's still the same changes, but there's just slight differences in flavor. And so in one way you can look at the animal spirit dance as taking the impression or the flavor of an animal upon you when you're doing your spirit dance. That's one way to look at it. But the other way to look at it is how is that animal in its life embodying those changes and then absorbing yourself, its ideas, its nature in terms of how it embodies the changes rather than how you embody the changes. And so effectively what you end up with is you end up with a kind of 2 different ways of looking at the same thing. One is the changes that the animal uses in its life, and then you embody those in human terms, or you take on the flavor of the animal, and hey presto, it works the other way around. Those changes arise within you quite naturally. As you get, for instance, which is the way around that I suspect that the Ainu crane dance, for instance, has been done historically. But the end result is quite similar. So what you find, as we've said before, what you find when those changes are that's a good reason to vary the changes, to change the context of the changes, to have slightly different patterns of mutual support among the different changes. That's a good reason to do it. A bad reason to do it is what we've talked before, is because it's just easier. Yeah, I like Tyrak. I like the change Tyrak. That's it. That would be shard, broken baseline, broken midline, solid top line, because it just seems to fit. When I start clapping my hands, it just seems to fit. So I'm just going to do that, and you get this Tyrak thing. So when you ask the question, what's a degenerate thing? What's something that's at one time been spirit dance and then gone back the way? You get lots of forms like that. There's so many, it's hard to pick one out, but a fun one is this Yakul dance from the Tanna Island. I think we mentioned them once before briefly. It's in the Pacific. It's an island in the Pacific, and it's got a lot of Tyrak in it. They just start clapping their hands, and then they start stamping on the floor, turning from side to side. It's just you see it from shamanistic, semi-shamanistic peoples the world over. I call it lazy spirit dance. Yeah, and
yes. Well, also, I think yes, lazy spirit dance, but also. And I speak from experience that it's almost like a door in when you're first starting to do this stuff, because it's almost
it's fine.
Given the spectrum we're talking about, it's simplistic, right? So because it's one that you can very easily feel and lock into,
which is fine
as a first step. Yeah,
which is fine. As long as it is just a first step. You get these people who've been doing that for 40 years, and they've never moved on, And so, that particular culture, it's very amusing to me. Quite interesting how it works, It's a little island. It's quite famous, a little island in the Pacific. It's about 25 miles long, 12 miles wide. It's that sort of a size. It's reasonably sizable. It's in the middle of nowhere, though, absolutely middle of nowhere. I think it's about 1,000 miles east of Australia. And quite a long way, more than 500 miles west of Fiji, so it's like literally in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
And its name actually means the Earth. So we got this world called the Earth, and then we have an island called the Earth, which is quite cool, That's definitely shamanistic, And it's famous because of Captain Cook. He found it. Famously, he in the 1770s, at night he was on his ship like he was. He went Captain Cook basically owned the Pacific, didn't he? He was the guy who basically mapped the Pacific. And if you look at the map of his voyages, they're like spaghetti. They go all over the place around the Pacific Ocean, 3 voyages that he had before somebody stuck a spear through him. And then, and the stories around, the stories around how he died are very, very telling about the mass. But it's probably a heretics podcast subject. But briefly, he was. We'll come back to Tanna Island. He was in Hawaii, one of the Hawaiian islands, and the 2 stories. Yeah, one story is that the Hawaiian islanders thought he was a god. And that he and they talked about like when Cortez arrived in South America, they thought he was a god and all this sort of stuff, and they thought he was a god of a certain thing. I forget what it was. But anyway, this particular god, according to their ritual, had to be sacrificed so that the new season would start. And so this is the Westerners' explanation of why he was killed. He was killed because they thought he was a god, And all these people, Cortez, they thought he was a god supposedly, and all these people, all these different, what they saw at that time, 18th century, late 18th century, as primitive people. They were going around the world, discovering all these primitive people. But the reason they said they thought they were gods is the primitive people didn't think they were gods. They thought they were gods. Yeah, they thought they could do no wrong. The part of the powerful British Empire, going around the world, conquering everybody and forcibly converting them over to Christianity. They thought they were gods. It wasn't the islanders. The other explanation for why Captain Cook was killed was he tried to abduct one of the kings of Hawaii. And he was killed in the process by the king's bodyguard. Which is the bodyguard's god. Yeah, and there's nobody thought he was a god or anything, And they'd been quite nice to him until he'd done that, apparently. So anyway, it's just the arrogance of European attitudes in those days, And the reason, it was all an excuse. They were all making excuses. I mean, they talked about the cannibalism, the thing about cannibalism. I mean, sure, it happened There's no doubt about that. But the bottom line is they blew stuff like that up out of proportion. For instance, on this particular island, Tanna, there was a guy called John Gibson Patton who visited it in the middle of the 1800s, and he told these horrific stories of, you know, if wives were disobedient, they were murdered, and you know, all these horrible things were done to them, tortured and murdered, and all this kind of stuff, you know, but what was that about? Why was he saying that stuff? It could be just like a news report. All this horrible stuff's happening here. We should do something about it. But he wasn't a news reporter. He was a Christian missionary. Yeah. And basically what he's doing is to his superiors back in Europe, he's saying, look how degenerate these people are. Do they ever need Christianity? Keep funding me, please. Yeah. So that I can sort all this horror story out, you know? And so this particular island, Tanna, is quite cool. It's got an active volcano on it. I've never been, but I would love to go. It looks amazing. Like I say, it was Captain Cook spotted the light from the volcano at night. That's how he discovered the island. Except obviously all the people who lived on it had discovered it before him. But things like that didn't seem to matter in those days. It is a Melanesian culture, like a lot of the islands in that area, but they seem to have hung on to some of their more traditional kind of ways of living than some of the other islands around there. But it's an extremely fertile island. It's one of the most fertile islands in the Pacific. It produces stuff like coffee and coconuts and fruit and vegetables, kava, all these kind of things. A lot of those Pacific islands aren't particularly fertile, and this one just happens to be. Maybe it's something to do with the volcano, I don't know. But agriculture has been in place there for a very long time, so you might imagine that their culture is very miasmatic, very, very miasmatic culture. And it has a huge population. About 30,000 people live on this little island. So it's definitely not a hunter-gatherer society. But it's one that's very well known, given its remoteness and size, for completely different reasons. There's this dance, as I said, that they do. It's very typical of simplistic shamanistic dances the world over. It's clapping, singing in a very original, going around stamping, a bit like the dance of the sand people that we mentioned, where they go around in a circle like a train. And this will combine with that. They'll have some people clapping and jumping up and down in the middle, shaking their heads around.
There's a Sufi ritual. I believe it's a Sufi ritual where they go around in a circle as well, and it's very energetic. And they go around in a circle for about 2 minutes and then flick around and go back around the other circle.
But my point with the circling is just some of the people going around the circle, others are in the middle jumping up and down, others are turning. Not everybody's doing the same thing. So it does have some, and there's another thing with these collaborative shamanic dances. We mentioned the Kagura last time. In a collaborative shamanic dance, not everybody's doing the same thing. They could all be doing different things, but somehow it kind of works together. So there is something slightly shamanic about it. It's a shared rhythm. It's a shared experience for them. There's a lot of pivoting back steps that you get in that. They'd be familiar to people who do martial arts. And so this kind of dance is there. We'll come on to what it gets used for in this day and age. And you can see where the miasma starts coming in. But this island is not famous for any of that stuff. This island is famous for a guy called John Frum, who I don't know if you've heard of him before, but basically, John Frum, people think that Frum wasn't his surname. Some people think he was American, some people think he was British. He visited the island in the 1920s or the 1930s, that sort of time period. And people think that Frum wasn't his surname. It was like, I'm John from the USA. And the islanders thought that his second surname was Frum because he called himself John from the USA. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it's very, very famous for this John Frum religious movement. And they're basically, he told them that they should get back to their original. They'd already started being degenerate. I think they'd started picking up Christianity since Captain Cook and co arrived. And he told them they should go back to their original religion. But I think by that time they'd forgotten what their original religion was. So he was able to tell them his sort of early 20th century notion of what their religion should be. And he appeared before the Second World War. And disappeared before the Second World War. That apparently they have a medal that's supposed to be from him that he left. So this is their sacred. One of their sacred items is this medal that John Frum left. But I've seen a picture of what's supposed to be a tribal elder, purported to be a tribal elder, holding that medal. And he was supposed to visit in the 1920s, 1930s. Well, that tribal elder I saw that was holding, that was a British Silver Jubilee 25 pence coin from 1977. Yes. So I don't know whether this is just, them making up a story or not, or maybe that's not the medal, but basically, this concept of custom they have among themselves, which is their traditional culture, their pseudo-shamanistic culture, if you like. Nobody knows how much of it came from John Frum himself and how much of it came from them. And Tanna has been seen as sort of the John Frum movement on Tanna has been seen as an alternative to the modernity that's encouraged by the many, many, many Christian missionaries who visit that island, who live on that island. The island was absolutely inundated with Christian missionaries for a long, long period of time. And so this is like a reaction against them. Now, famously, there's I can't pronounce this, but something like Yauchnanen, which is a center of a sort of branch of the John Frum movement, which is super famous because these are the guys that revere supposedly Prince Philip as a god. The Duke of Edinburgh. This is these people, a subset of these people on this island, yeah. And Prince Philip, for those that don't know, the Prince Philip is the husband of our current queen. He has retired, and he's very old. And he had a car accident recently, but basically, this is all of the news. But basically, supposedly they're worshipping him as God. During the Second World War, the forces, the fighting forces, Japanese, Americans, British, brought a lot of wealth into the island. What the islanders saw as wealth, there were lots of good things came from that war as they saw it. I don't think there was a lot of fighting went on, and there was an awful lot of troops with spending money and chocolate and all that kind of stuff, And the islanders were very, very sad when the Americans left the island. I guess there was Australian troops based there as well, given its proximity to Australia. They were very, very sad. And so they formed a thing, part of the John Frum movement, they formed a thing called the Tanna Army in the 1950s and 60s, which produced replicas of stuff that had happened, that had been there during World War II, that they associated with good things and prosperity. So they produced replica, fake guns with bayonets, which they hold over their shoulders as marched up and down, fake military helmets, even fake spectacles made out of straw. They don't have any lenses in them or anything, And their famous thing is they make these incredibly beautiful aircraft out of what appears to be like palm fronds or something, straw, basically, very, very realistic looking things. And it's what's known as a cargo cult. I think we've mentioned cargo cults before on the podcast. And the idea is they're fake rifles, they're fake ammunition bandoliers, they're fake military hats, they're fake airplanes, they're spectacle, all that kind of stuff. It's trying to get the spirits to draw back that prosperity that they enjoyed during the Second World War. And guess what? It worked. It absolutely worked, because tourism has become their number one industry as a direct result of the quirky little interesting John Frum movement. Yeah. And so the place is absolutely inundated with tourists. and who've brought a lot of wealth back to the island and so on, So they didn't pick any old island. They picked the one with the quirky little cargo cult. So I have a big question over whether they actually believe this stuff, Do they really revere the Duke of Edinburgh, or is it just something to pull in British tourists, But quite an interesting island. And, there's a certain amount of shamanistic aspect in that dance that they do. The main thing to me that leans towards the shamanism, the thing that leans towards the degenerate stroke, it's not their original thing, and it's something that they concocted together with John Frum to go back to their original thing after having been already indoctrinated with Christianity, and the original thing had sort of died out. Is the simplicity of that. It's the usual bouncing up and down the spot, turn to side to side, very, very simplistic. I mean, you wouldn't need anybody to teach you that. You just pick it up,
Yeah, I mean, possibly. It's probably likely, but you see that all over the place, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. But my point is, the thing that tends towards the shamanistic aspect is the fact that when they do that, the dancers are not all doing the same thing, which is a big deal. If you see multi-shamanic dances with multiple shamans involved, one of the ways you can tell that it's fake is if everybody's doing exactly the same thing. Yeah, that's a big, big no. And I don't mean just the same thing in terms of, one person does one thing and another person does a different set movement in response to that. That's not what I mean. The people are not doing set movements. It's not set. Yeah. And this is like a very simplistic example of that, And so you do also get, this thing with how many shamans are involved in the dance. We talked about Kagura, which has quite a lot involved. There's one version of the Kagura where there's a different dancer for each of the 8 trigrams, plus another dancer for each of yin and yang. So you've got 10 dancers all together. And then you've got the sort of Taoist circle walking where there's effectively one person in a kind of a different form of spirit dance. And what I've seen a lot with those guys, the Taoists doing the circle walking, they're sort of going from the almost Terrell position to the almost half-task position and back again. It's just the squat, it's the compression expansion, And then the feet are going around in this semi-ritualized way with them changing direction and what have you. It's a meditative kind of practice. That's a single person. But then if you think of what about a spirit dance with just 2 people involved, And this is where the crossover into martial arts comes. This kind of 2 people involved in spirit dance, not 3 people, but just 2 people. And you get stuff like, crossover stuff like Taekyon, from Korea, not to be confused with Taekwondo, which has got absolutely nothing to do with shamanism or actually got very little to do with Korea, let alone shamanism. So, but basically Taekyon, which is spelled Taekyon in Romanized form, is a very fluid kind of spirit dance that's performed between 2 performers. And it's got a very unique kind of footwork. It's not unique, but it's a kind of footwork that I've seen used in shamanic type of activities, quite a lot. So this footwork's called Pumbalgi. Again, my Korean pronunciation is not so fantastic, which means it's a bit like the Spanish school of fencing, where they would have a geometric idea of a stepping patterns that were used to gain strategic advantage. And they used to draw beautiful diagrams in the Spanish school. They used to draw beautiful diagrams of how the places to step to give you a sort of line where basically it's all about you can reach the opponent and the opponent can't reach you because of triangulation. This Pumbalgi is all about that. It's like triangles, stepping around on the points of triangles. And the 2 dancers, fighters, if you want to call them that, of course in modern times they've tried to make it look like a modern martial art. They're trying to macho it all up and all that kind of stuff, even saw some people talking about Taekyon ground fighting and stuff, to try and generate some interest on the internet, But basically, it's about 2 people interacting with each other in a reasonably combative way. But it's definitely still very spirit dance. It's not 100% realistic. And each person is one person's sort of suggesting a movement, a bit like in the Brazilian capoeira as well. One person's sort of suggesting a movement, and the other person is filling that space in their own spontaneous way. And when you see a couple of guys that are good at it, it's definitely a form of spirit dance. It's very beautiful. It's like beautiful spirit dance in pajamas. They wear these lovely pajama suits that look so much better than the silly martial arts gis that you see, you know, and that I wear. Says the Kempo guy, slagging down what he wears himself. It's so beautiful and so unusual that it's actually been recognised as a national treasure in South Korea. And UNESCO, you know, the people who do the World Heritage Sites, they've called it an intangible cultural heritage, whatever that means. And it's the only one in Korea. It is the only martial art that's been recognised that in Korea. So a beautiful thing. If you haven't seen Taekyon before, do look it up. Do not mistake it for Taekwondo. Just be clear what you're looking at. If you want to know about the history of Taekwondo, I'm sure we'll cover that at some point on the Heretics podcast, but it isn't one for Woven Energy.
Cracking.
And that's about the hour, isn't it, mate?
Yeah, I guess our next job, Damon, is to think about our next step with stage 3. And do we, you know, how do we bridge the gap between the Grove, what our plans for the Grove are, and potentially carrying on a bit of extra information. Well, I think
we definitely need to give some more practical exercises. I think we can do that on audio. Yes. So that's a way to bridge it. So let's think of some practical. Maybe do a
how to get started
practical spirit dance techniques to try out, or just spirit dance groundwork techniques to try out.
And we'll try and make sure these are absolutely from the beginning. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, hopefully we've done stage 1 and 2, so hopefully people are fairly familiar with a few movements by now.
And so we can do that. So a practical episode, that's one thing. We also said we were going to do an episode on psychoactive substances, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
So we need to do that as well.
Yes, I think it'll be good to cover that, because a lot of people come to shamanism thinking that that's a major, if not the part of it, the big, this is what shamanism is all about, and that's not the case. And we do want to. We've hinted at it throughout the life of this podcast, but we want to.
I'll try my best to stay awake during that episode, Joe. So it's this subject I find incredibly tedious, but anyway, we will do it since we said we'd do it.
Yeah, we'll do it. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I think there's a lot.
There's loads to talk about.
It's not black and white.
That's how interesting it is. It's a different matter, but there's loads to talk about. All right, mate.
Yeah, cracking. So, guys, thanks for listening. Head to wovenenergy.com and try and navigate the site as best you can. See if you can sign up to the email list, and you'll get your free Get Started episode, which is where I prod Damon a little bit, try and get a bit more controversial. I haven't listened to that episode in a while. I'll have to give that a listen
check out
and see what
Heretics,
we actually cover. Yes, check out the Heretics
podcast.com.
Hereticspodcast.com. You can find that on iTunes as well. So if you just type Heretics into iTunes, that'll come up. Thanks.
There is actually a Christian podcast called The Heretics as well. So I'd put Heretics by Woven Energy.
Heretics by Woven Energy, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to get mixed up.
I've listened to the Christian one. It's not that uninteresting. I quite enjoyed it, to be honest.
Oh, cool. Cool. All right then. Thanks ever so much, guys, and we'll see you in the next one. And just like before, I think, just like I said at the beginning of the episode, I think we'll be able to get these out a bit quicker now. See you next time.
Thanks.